So
in a short while, and clearly one of the leaders in the New Iowa movement to assure people access to clean water. My name is Jim LaRue. I'm your host today, and I'm legal counsel to the newest activist group established in the state of Iowa, whose purpose it is to protect Iowans' fundamental right to access to clean water. I asked Steve to play the Dylan song. People of a certain age, I'm sure there are not that many here today that will remember this the way that I do. But an earlier civil rights movement was not simply a matter of speeches, but it was one of song, and songs whose lyrics spoke of community, people working together. I think, and in the months that follow, our group will actually be proposing the text of what we hope will be a new constitutional amendment to the state of Iowa's constitution, which establishes as a fundamental right access to clean air and clean water. When you talk about a fundamental right, at least we lawyers do, we talk of it as being one that is in earlier eras of the law called a natural right. It was one that preceded the formation of more formal laws. It's hard to imagine anywhere, but particularly in the state of Iowa, a more fundamental right than that to the access to clean water. Early settlers coming to the state of Iowa, well before even a state had been established, and watching the native peoples who had their camping areas and their hunting areas closely situated to Iowa's streams and rivers, they too noted, visitors here, settlers here, the astonishing clarity of Iowa's water. So too it was, and this history is in your own city's history that's published on the internet. It's how I learned it, that the earliest settlers here, of course, some of them the Spanish mines, lead mines, in the early 1800s, even before the city of Dubuque was formally established, while trying to drill into a lead mine on the lower end of the hill, struck water in enormous quantities of the clearest spring water flooded out. So the first challenge of this city was not to find water, but how to contain it and how to use it. And that's been a challenge ever since. One thing that has always been Dubuque's lucky call is its proximity to such clean water, but the fact that so many of the aquifers move in this direction towards the river, so that even in dry times, the city has almost always had access to some of the cleanest, purest water in our entire state. And of course, you're next to the Mississippi River, you know the importance of rivers. But we're coming to a point in our state's history where something that we've taken for granted, clean and bountiful water, both are challenged. In the western part of the state, rivers have dried up in recent years. Northeast Iowa, less threatened to quantity, but the quality of the water is increasingly at risk and under pressure. There's no sole cause of this problem, and particularly the quality of water, but as Chris Jones will later express, and as Steve Basie will give a vivid example, the unique, profound, and increasing pressures placed on our waters by a new form of agriculture, what we might call industrial agriculture, where the water is moving much too quickly off the land, where the farming goes fence row to fence row with increasing amounts of nitrates and other kinds of fertilizers, and then combining that with a new era of raising livestock, which creates incredible amounts of manures and wastes, which have nowhere to go eventually then to our rivers and streams. We're coming to a crisis moment, and the people who have formed the Driftless Water Defenders, DWD, are the group who has invited you to today's meeting, and we are so very grateful that you would come. Driftless Water Defenders. Driftless being an important part of Iowa's geography, but it's also a cultural area. Ask people here and going north what the Driftless area is, and they'll tell you in a heartbeat. It's something that binds people together, and we're wanting to make a stand here. People who live here, in their own memory, still remember what clean water is. They remember where, as youth, they fished and or hunted. They remember, as business people, tourists coming to enjoy the unique water that is here. They remember healthier days, days that preceded the incredible statistic that came out this spring, and perhaps you heard it, that Iowa now, of the 50 states, is second only to Kentucky in the cancer rate that we have as citizens. And more disturbingly, we're the only state whose cancer rates are increasing. Now, people who are smarter than me, and both of your speakers would be in that category along with a lot of others, people who are smarter than I, who understand epidemiology, describe these kinds of studies is, in one sense, a snapshot in time, but it's also a way of looking backwards, sort of like a big telescope. If you want to know how old the universe is, you turn the telescope back into the universe and begin to date the stars. An epidemiological study by those who understand the science tell me that a cancer rate today is a snapshot of conditions 10, 15 years earlier. To me, it's not a coincidence that we now are the only state in the country with cancer rates increasing. And if you take the origins of what we're calling industrial agriculture, it started just a little more than a decade ago. It's not a sole causation, but it's an important thing for us to consider. And the grave concerns that we have about the quality of Iowa's water is what causes this entity to form. The Driftless, because it's a unique area that needs preservation, whose memories about clear water are still here, who culturally support clean water. Driftless, water, the most fundamental substance on earth, and our fundamental right to have access to it in a legal sense, and defenders. That is, we're here to take a stand. People are not going to remove from us our right to that access. We're reasonable people. But as we also describe our group, we advocate, we educate, but importantly, we're willing to litigate. And that is to say, our rights under law, if need be, will be enforced in administrative proceedings and courts of law. Those are the characteristics of our group. I know that a lot of you here are just sort of sampling the wares. Others of you are already members. But if in the course of this meeting or later and you're not a member, we deserve, in your mind, to have you as a member. We hope you will join. We have things like caps and t-shirts too, and bumper stickers, other kinds of what the younger folks call merch, that if you're so inclined, and copies of Chris Jones's book, we would encourage you to purchase those as well. We're a 501c3 organization, recognized and approved in our initial application by the Internal Revenue Service. So if you should be inclined to give a contribution, it would be tax deductible. A couple of housekeeping things, and then we'll move on to the major part of the program. I wanted to introduce some law students who have been helping us this summer. Noah Gaber is sitting here, raised his hand, is a Dubuque native. He, in the law school parlance, is an L2. That means he got through the first year and he's coming back for more punishment. And he, along with the other students whose names I'll mention, have received grants. Their work has been recognized by the Hubble Environmental Law Institute at the University of Iowa College of Law. He and his classmates, whose names I will give, have been able, because of that financial support by the Institute of the College of Law, to assist us in our work this summer when we have been launching our new group. Next to Noah is Mark Perhoda. You raise your hand. Mark is another L2 student. Each of these students have been helping in a number of ways, one of which they all were required to put together an event such as this. I know from experience, practicing law about 40 years, that we're here a modest-sized town or community, and you happen to be on a board, and you'll be asked to be on boards because boards needed legal advice. People will look to you to help them to gather others. It's one of the tools in our toolkits, how to create corporations, how to get people organized. And so each of the law students, Noah, Mark, and two others whose names, have each been given a county and assigned the task of putting together a meeting. I think that Noah has done a wonderful job, and today's meeting is the one that he helped to organize. Kristen Nixon is not with us today, but he helped to put the first one together over in Decorah. And Nina Marquardt, although is not with us today, helped to put together one in Decatur. Now, here's what they've helped us to do. First, they helped to draft a letter. Now, it was polished up by Chris Jones, but you've got to start somewhere. Put together to a very powerful letter that Chris Jones wrote to the EPA, asking them to put pressure on Iowa's DNR. You may or may not know that much of the regulatory work of the EPA is contracted to the DNR to implement. And our view was that DNR is woefully short in needed regulatory enforcement of clean water laws. And we've asked the EPA to look into it. And when a voice like Chris's speaks, the EPA listens. I'll be very surprised if in the not too distant future, EPA begins to move in a more favorable direction. Second, our law students helped us to put together articles and bylaws for the very group that is here, and they were filed. Third, they've been helping me to write a law review article. It'll be published later, and if I'm successful, I'll have Chris Jones co-author it with me as we get to final versions of it, giving the theoretical and legal basis for our proposed amendment to the Iowa Constitution, which embodies as a fundamental right the right of Iowans to access clean air and clean water. And the amendment will ask for the right to be defined as a fundamental right, meaning that our Iowa Supreme Court has to give great deference to the right when matching it against statutes or administrative rules or actions of state entities which may violate the right. Now we don't have any such protection. If a court finds a rule, even a rule that it doesn't like involving water or air, and it seems that there's a rational basis for it, if the court says, I wouldn't have done that, well, it doesn't mean the legislator couldn't have done that, they back off. We want courts to say, this is not only bad policy, but it fails to recognize Iowans' fundamental right to clean air and to clean water. So they've researched the first draft of that, and then finally, something that I hope will have an impact on our state. There are very few lawyers in Iowa who represent the public in litigation and proceedings who are advocating those who are polluting to do less of it. I happen to be one of them. Haven't been doing it very long, maybe a decade. But we need more lawyers willing to do it. And so they're helping me to write a manual, accessible to lawyers, but also to the public who want to defend their rights to clean water under law. I hope by the fall that this first chapter of the new Iowa Environmental Law Handbook will be done, and we've made great progress because of our law students. The fifth law student who's with us is Kate Robinson, who's seated up here. Kate was a very excellent employee of our law office for a period of time before she entered law school. So now she's doing a little both. Mostly she's a law student, but she also was continuing to work with us, and this summer has been devoting great energy to our efforts to get this nonprofit corporation started. Well, the final closing is sort of, before I introduce our first speaker, Chris Jones, is to go back to where I started. That is, and I've mentioned it a number of times, a fundamental right. A fundamental right is a civil right. In my mind, a civil right that should be recognized in Iowa is the access to clean air and clean water. I think we're at the start of a civil rights movement in Iowa on just this subject, and we'll see how that goes. Well, our first speaker today is Steve Dacey. Steve opened up singing. You'll see if you could look at the back, there's a photograph of Steve, and he's on the far left side, and he's our speaker, our first one, talking about a matter concerning which he has served as expert witness in litigation, and that is a matter over in Clayton County, Iowa, where at the head of Iowa's purest street, Bloody Run Creek, a family established a 10,000 head cattle confinement operation, producing millions of gallons of waste. And there have been two lawsuits, the first one challenging the manure management plan, the second one where we represented folks, which is still in progress, challenging the state of Iowa's decision to issue a water use permit to the operation under a statute that says that the public interest should be protected. Steve may be slightly encumbered. We had some illustrations, and I was to have brought some hard copy posters, and failed to do that today in my drive from Highlandville this morning over to here. So Steve, do the best you can. I think we have ways to get to your posters up on the screen, but if there's a technical problem, I apologize in advance for that.
Do we have any slides at the moment? Or, oh, I guess I don't know where they are on this. Can we start? Yeah. Okay. And then the other two are there as well, are they? So this is the, in black, that's Bloody Run Creek watershed. And as you see, this is highway, goes through Highway 52, 13, goes through there. This is the little town of Monona. Of course, Marquette will be down here. Spook Cave is right about here. If you're all familiar with Spook Cave, anybody here who took their kids to Spook Cave, raise your hand. Not enough of you, not enough of you. I remember taking my kids to Spook Cave, and man, it was a blast. You got to lean back in that rowboat, and then you finally get into the cave, and it opens up. So it's a great place to go. So anyway, if you've got kids or grandkids, think about it. So this is the location of Supreme Beef LLC, and their manure management plan is for about 11,000 head. We normally have about 9,000 or 10,000 there, it seems like. And these areas shaded are their planned manure application fields. I won't say manure disposal fields, that's a bit disparaging to farmers. They're manure application fields. The issue is a lot of times they really shouldn't be putting them there or shouldn't be putting them in the amount that they're putting on those fields. So it is an earth and manure basin. If you look in the Iowa Code, it says, and it's classified as an open feedlot, and we'll see a slide in a minute, and you're going to scratch your heads about how is that an open feedlot? We'll see that slide in a minute, but it is classified under law as an open feedlot, and also under law, open feedlots are not allowed to use earth and manure pits. So how did they manage to do that? Well, they dodged and weaved through rules and regulations, and they had various parts of DNR turn a blind eye, and in some cases collude, plus they had political interference from a very influential senator whose son-in-law is one of the owners. So they're there. We challenged, as Jim said, a manure management plan. We were successful in that challenge in court, and that required them to redo the plan. And after 2 more efforts, they finally got a plan that DNR would approve and that we still think is deficient, and we have not decided if that will be another challenge. But they're in operation spreading manure. So I'm not going to spend any more time on that. I'm going to see if I can work this computer and get to, I don't need that. Do I? This one. Oh, I like this one. There it is. So I'm kind of proud of this. I put this together. This was based on what's called the 2020 LIDAR. If anyone knows what LIDAR is, the guy's shaking his head. It's the brand new 2020. The flights were flown in 2019, so at that time the earth and manure basin was under construction but not completed, so I've outlined it in black where it is completed. And these are the 6 barns. Now, I call them cattle containment structures. I refuse to call them open feedlots, and by law, I'm not allowed to call them confinements. But if you drive by and look at them, they look like confinements. The cattle are in there, the cattle don't go anywhere. So if these were designated as confinements, they would not have been allowed to construct, because there's 5 sinkholes 300 feet away. And the separation distance from a confinement to a sinkhole is 1,000 feet. So they would not have been allowed to construct. But as I say, they've been dodging and weaving regulations, and they're calling themselves an open feedlot. Fine. This is a intermittent stream flowed right through. So they put the earth and manure basin in the intermittent stream. They dug it out, and that's where they put it. We believe that they may not have correctly met the separation distance to cars, which is 25 feet from the bottom of the pit. And interesting, when they built this, they thought they would do a digester, and so they called it an industrial anaerobic wastewater lagoon, and those rules only call for 10 feet of separation from cars. But if it's an anaerobic industrial lagoon, then the land application rules are totally different than manure application rules, totally different, and they would not have been able to spread. They would not have been able to jump through all of the hoops as an industrial facility. So they constructed it as an industrial facility, but all along they planned to spread the manure as an animal feeding operation. And we know that based on work from 2017 that we uncovered. So this is the entrance to the sinkholes. You can see the slopes here. At times of heavy rain, this is going to, consider this a beaver dam. What happens in a beaver dam to a stream? All of a sudden, you have a pond. And it's deep. It can get pretty deep. And it backs up. And that's what they've done here. They've created an obstruction. You see the contour lines. Clearly, they're creating a big beaver pond here. And when there's times of heavy rain, the risk is that this water will enter those sinkholes. The water will not overtop the lagoon, but it can enter those sinkholes if the water level rises even 5 feet in that pond. So there's serious concern about that they will be polluting the aquifer in this. So that's all I'm going to say about that. And let me find the next, there's one last slide, I believe. And this is the Thompson well slide. Do you know where that is? Oh, it's PE. So there's a neighbor next to Supreme Beef, LLC, and they live just across the road, maybe a quarter mile away, something like that. And they've got a goat farm. And they're trying to get certified in order to sell their goat milk to a certain program for organic dairies. And there's certain hoops they have to jump through in terms of the quality of the water that they feed to the goats. So when they tried to get that certification, they were denied because their water quality of their existing well, which was at about 300 feet, didn't meet the criteria. So their original wells were in what I call the karst aquifers. And you can see before 2008, the old well was testing good for nitrates and bacteria before 2008. Then they did a bunch of testing in 2022 when they would try to get certification, and here's what their wells were looking like then. The old wells were totally polluted with nitrate and coliform. So they had to dig new wells. So they started digging, Shaver Well Company started digging, and every couple hundred feet Shaver would stop and say, is this deep enough? Well, let's test the water, and the water failed. Well, they'd dig a couple hundred feet more, test the water, it failed. Finally, they got down to 650 feet until they finally had water in the Jordan Aquifer that would pass the test. So, can anybody hazard a guess what it cost the Thompsons to dig that new well? Somebody throw out a number.
$45,000.
More.
100,000?
No. $65,000. $65,000 to dig that well. So they could get certified so their goat milk could be used to produce some kind of goat products. So there are real consequences to over-application of manure and other fertilizers in these areas. There's real consequences. And now, are there any, one last point, just one last point. Are there any supervisors in the audience? But there are citizens who vote for supervisors, right? So supervisors are always complaining that they don't have any regulatory control over the siting or size of CAFOs. Did you ever hear that from a politician? I don't have any control over the size or location of a CAFO in my county. No control. They don't have any authority, but they have standing. That's my point. If DNR approves a manure management plan that is deficient, and every plan I've looked at has been deficient, just so you know. I've probably looked at 20, 25. If DNR approves a plan that's deficient in your county, the Board of Supervisors, in my opinion, have standing to challenge DNR and force DNR to fix those plans or rescind those plans. Now, this requires going to court. And that's what we did in Blighter Creek, and we were successful. But just so you know, don't let the supervisors tell you they have no say in whether CAFOs expand in your county, because they don't have authority, but they have standing. And any lawyers out there know what I mean by that. So, and if your supervisors continue to say, well, there's nothing we can do, then vote for different supervisors. Because there is something they can do. And if all these plans were improved and written correctly, it could reduce the amount of manure being spread by maybe 30% in your county. And that 30% reduction would be in the areas that are most susceptible to affecting water quality. So that's just one area, and that's the last thing I'll say about it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Steve Vasey. I wanted to take a moment here to recognize Chuck Eisenhardt has joined us. I'm sure many of you know him, and he's one of the more knowledgeable people in the Iowa General Assembly on the issues that we're talking about today. And Chuck, thanks so much for coming. Are there any other elected officials that I may have failed to have acknowledged at the start of our meeting? If so, I wanted to be sure to do that. There are some people, not elected officials, so I wanted to be sure to acknowledge the treasurer of DWD, is longtime resident of Highlandville, Iowa. Terry Mazzoni is here at the back of the audience, and we thank her for her good work. Also, Larry Stone and his wife Margaret are here, seated in the midway. His photograph is there in back of him in our display, which was provided to us by the Isaac Walton League. The people who are portrayed in these photographs, according to Isaac Walton League, they said, you know, when we have great athletes, we give them attention, we put up billboards and posters. We would like to recognize people who've done great things for the environment. And it was the Isaac Walton League. I happen to agree with their acknowledgments of these people, but it wasn't I who decided. You see there in his fishing gear in the far left, and Larry Stone. When you're in the middle of the Driftless area, I've noticed this, I've done a lot of door-to-door. Sometimes I'll be confronted by someone who doesn't recognize me or wondering of my purpose. And will say, I'm getting challenged, and rather than to argue the issue, I'll say, well, do you know Larry Stone? I'm a friend of his. And most of the time people know who Larry is. In this area, I suppose it's Chuck. Eisenhower too, I would say that about. But we really appreciate the help there. Chuck, did you have something?
You know, a very shy member of the Dubuque County Soil and Water Conservation District here, Mike Freiberger.
Oh, good, we like shy people.
I have a comment to you on your Constitution Amendment. You should put soil in there too.
Let's talk about it. It's in the drafting stage. I hear you.
Thank you.
I hear you. Thank you for pointing that. Anyone else, Chuck, that we should shy people?
We have a retired member of the University of Dubuque Environmental Sciences Department here,
And who are you, sir?
Dale Easley.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. The two brief comments about what Steve was just saying that caught me probably as a lawyer thinking about evidence. Steve has been analyzing all this. We owe him a great deal. There are these important distinctions upon certain kinds of structures, some of which by definition of law require more scrutiny before they are approved than others. You saw those buildings and may have heard Steve say that the way that they were characterized as open feedlots caused them to be exempted from a number of important regulations, one of which was the ability of the public to attend a hearing to explain their concerns. The way they got around this, and this is a part of the testimony that came out in our own trial before an administrative law judge, they put a ribbon of concrete about 10 feet wide on the side of the building that theoretically, if the cattle wanted to and if they were allowed to go through a gate that was not locked, they could stand on that concrete. With that extra concrete, it meant that only 90% of the concrete pad was covered, not 100%, so it was considered to be an open feedlot. I've gone by there, and I did again this morning, just to test myself, because if I had seen cattle on that ribbon, I would have admitted my error, which I've repeated in court pleadings again and again. When there again, I've never seen a cow on the ribbon. And for regulatory agencies to look the other way because someone's drawn a concrete ribbon and therefore exempted a facility holding 10,000 cattle from being placed under a roof and all the resulting waste, and all of that being at the headwaters of what has been the cleanest stream in the state of Iowa, is extremely disturbing, at the very least. The other thing that I wanted to mention was the testing of Tammy Thompson and their herd, and that they couldn't qualify because their well was contaminated. That's a pre-existing family business. It preceded the expansion of this cattle operation. And they have borne the expense of $60,000 plus the possible loss of their business because of, we can't say it was caused by Supreme Beef. At the very least, we can say that that watershed of Bloody Run Creek has been already so saturated by numbers of confined animal feeding operations, and those soils can only take so much manure spread on them, only so much waste, and it goes into the karst, goes into the aquifers, and that individual families would bear the costs of these operations seems terribly wrong and a disequilibrium of the law. Our next speaker, Chris Jones, I know some of you know him already. My guess is that many of you came today when you heard he was going to be here. He had been crisscrossing Iowa. In fact, I took a 6-hour drive today already just to be here because he was in demand in another part of the state. Chris Jones and his book, Swine Republic, has been recognized by the Library of Congress as one of the notable books of the United States. I was asking Chris just the other day, because I imagine come August, like any other author I can think of, would be going to Washington DC to be recognized by the Library of Congress as such a notable achievement. And he says, "No, Jim, I can't go." "What?" He says, "Yeah, I'm going fishing." Okay, he's the real deal, I get it. A long pre-existing trip that he's been planning on for years happened to be on the date when the Library of Congress wanted to recognize him for his work. Chris Jones, when we first met a couple months ago, I went to a book reading. I was so impressed. And when I went up just to get my book signed, I looked him in the eyes. He was exhausted. I said, "Chris, you can't keep this up. If I could get a group of Iowans together who'd help to put some wind under your wings, would you consider being president of such a group? You don't have to do the administrative work. We'll do that. You need help, and we want to help you." I was glad. I was relentless in my approaches, and Chris said yes. Finally, I'm so glad he did, because he gives credence and allows visibility in an added way, not the only way. Chris is doing this so much on his own, but we get to help him to do this work that needs to be done. Chris Jones, thank you for coming.
So Jim, what you should have said was, "You look exhausted when you like to be more exhausted." Because that's what I am, and so yes, I drove 300 miles yesterday over to Arnold's Park, Iowa, West Okoboji Lake, and I did an event with Art Cullen yesterday, and I'm sure some of you have heard of him. Then back over here today, across Iowa again, and I'll just say, everywhere I go and everywhere the Driftless Water Defenders goes, there's always somebody standing up because there's no seats. And the same was yesterday. We had this big tent. There was probably 200 people there, no seat to be had. We had an event. I had an event with Jess Piper from Missouri on Wednesday down in Iowa City. We planned on 100. We had 125. And so there are people that are interested in this. There's people across Iowa that sense that there's something wrong here, right? That there's something wrong with our environment and that it affects the quality of life here in Iowa. And so I've been back and forth on Highway 20 so many times. I just decided this morning I had time. I'm going to drive across on Highway 3. And I came clear across Iowa on Highway 3. And I don't know if that's ever been done before, but I did. And so I just observed the towns as I come across on Highway 3. And as I'm sitting here before you folks got here, I looked up the population of these towns in 1980 and then now. And so Dickens, Iowa, 289 down to 146. Gillette Grove, 93 down to 30. Marathon, 442 down to 230. Webb, 222 down to 138. Albert City, 818 down to 677. Pocahontas, 2352 down to 1867. Gilmore City, 626 down to 487. Humboldt, 4794, they've only lost 2 people. Goldfield, 789 down to 634. Clarion, 3060 down to 2810. Coulter, 264 down to 219. Hampton, 4630 down to 4337. Strawberry Point, 1463 down to 1155. Colesburg, 463 down to 386. What's the next one? Shell Rock, 1478 down to 1268. Dumont, 815 down to 634. Allison, 1132 down to 966. And Luxembourg, 271 down to 245. And so I see this information about, especially from Farm Bureau, Iowa Farm Bureau Federation, saying, oh, we have to protect rural life. We need to protect the existing production system in agriculture because we have to protect our small towns and protect rural life. This is what the existing production system has given us. It has depopulated rural Iowa, okay? And it's not just Iowa, it's other states too. And so we're depopulating rural Iowa, and it's a joke now that eventually we're gonna have one farmer per county. Can that be good for our state? It just cannot be good. It can't be good that we're just destroying our rural counties for this production system that we have. And so, I don't know, some of you've probably heard of Wendell Berry, is a fairly famous writer that's written about the effect on agriculture, and this quote from him, I think, says it. The more local and settled the culture, the better it stays put, the less the damage. It is the outsider whose road of excess leads to a desert. And that's clearly what has happened in Iowa, okay? Not only are we losing people across the countryside, we're losing a part of our culture, okay? There can be no doubt that the existing production system, the consolidation that's occurred since 1980 in both crop production and in the livestock industry has degraded the culture of our state. And so I grew up in Iowa. My folks are both from Knoxville, Iowa, which is Marion County, southeast of Des Moines. And I had aunts and uncles that lived in small towns across southern Iowa. And, you know, I can remember going to these small towns, and these were nice, prosperous places. And now you go through these towns now, and they're not recognizable, right? They're not recognizable from when I was a kid. And so, of course, my career as a scientist was focused on water quality, and the water quality is degraded across our state. But I would tell you that the degraded water quality is just a symptom. It's just a symptom of an overall degradation that has occurred over the last 40 to 50 years. Okay, and so how can we turn this around? And so that's what we want to do here. We want to turn this around. And I will tell you today, you know, to think you can rely on quote unquote leaders to do this is wrong. Leaders will not turn this around. It has to be grassroots. It has to be people organizing and agitating, okay, for a better condition here. And we deserve a better condition here in terms of our natural resources. And again, I want to emphasize, this is a quality of life issue for us. And so Jim mentioned the cancer rate, second highest cancer rate in the country. But I would also say, would anybody in this room deny that life in this country has not gotten more stressful? I mean, it clearly has in the course of my life. Well, as human beings, one of the ways we deal with that stress is we go out and we enjoy nature, okay? This is a real instinctive thing for human beings to go out and enjoy nature as a way to reduce the stress in our lives. And we have so little opportunity to do that in Iowa. We have the second smallest percentage of public land of any state in the country. Our state parks are a mess. Our streams are a mess. Our lakes are a mess. The opportunity to enjoy nature has been taken from us, okay? It's been taken from us. We didn't hand it. It's been taken, and we need to demand that it be given back to us. And so, I lost my train there a little bit, but I brought some slides here to show today, and a lot of this focuses on the nutrient reduction strategy. And so the state's showcase water quality policy is the nutrient reduction strategy. And so we have, we did a science assessment back in 2012 to assess what practices would be best for reducing nutrient pollution. That's our main problem, nutrient pollution. That's nitrogen and phosphorus in our lakes, streams, and aquifers. And the goal of the nutrient strategy was to reduce nutrient pollution 45%. There was no target dates or other milestones, but there is this goal of 45%, which is aligned with EPA's Gulf Hypoxia Task Force, which is focused on cleaning up the nearshore areas of the Gulf of Mexico. And so I still, even though I'm retired now, mess around with water quality data, and is this right here? Froze it up. Okay. So I still look at the water quality data, and we had just a colossal nitrate loss event here in this state during May and June, and you don't hear much about it in the press. What we hear is propaganda from the industry and how good things are. But in May and June, in 2 months, we lost 344 million pounds of nitrogen from our streams from our farms to the stream network. 344 million pounds in 2 months. And so about 31% of Iowa drains to the Missouri River. We had about 102 million pounds go that direction. About 69% of Iowa drains to the upper Mississippi River. We had 241 pounds go in that direction. And so think about this. You know, we see these anhydrous tanks all over Iowa, right? In May and June, the contents of one of these left the state every minute for 2 months. One of them left the state. But yet we have to hear our state's leaders talk about how things are getting so much better. And so here's some of the watersheds in Iowa. The Turkey, near here. Well, 2 months we lost 18 million pounds of nitrogen down the Turkey River. That's about 31 pounds per crop acre in the Turkey. The Maquoketa, 12 million pounds. Iowa and Cedar combined there down at Wapello, Iowa, 89 million pounds, 2 months. Skunk River, 21 million pounds. Wapsie, 20 million. Des Moines River, 58 million. The Little Sioux, 20 million pounds. Floyd, 8 million pounds. West Nishnabotna, 5 million. The Nottoway, 3.2 million. And yes, it was wet, and we hear a lot. They say, well, it's so wet, and so we lost it because it's wet. We can't control the weather. Well, you know, the weather is what it is, right? We're in the middle of a continent, and by virtue of that, we're going to have extreme weather. And we can design our production systems around the expected range of climate conditions or not, right? And agriculture here in the state has chosen not, right? We do not design our systems around the expected range of weather conditions. So it was wet. We have 9 crop districts in Iowa. This is a percentage of normal precipitation across the 9 crop districts. Northwest Iowa, the huge storm up there that flooded Spencer and Rock Valley, Rock Rapids. That huge storm, okay, double the amount of rain, maybe I'll cut them some slack for that, but this is not beyond what we might expect here in Iowa, okay? We have wet weather, we have dry weather. Some years we can get 10 inches of rain, some years we can get 50 inches of rain. So again, we can design our systems around this expected range of conditions or not, and we need to demand that the industry do that. And again, we hear from the industry and from government about all the progress that's being made. And, you know, this word momentum, I get so sick of hearing this. And so this here, a screenshot from 2015, Iowa's water quality efforts gaining momentum. Here's one the next year, 2016, Branstad seeks momentum on water quality. 2021, conservation and water quality momentum. Conservation and water quality progress gaining momentum on Iowa's farms, 2022. our NGOs have even sort of latched on to this rhetoric of the industry, building momentum from the Center for Rural Affairs, 2022. A day at the farm, defining a decade of momentum. And so our government entities have also adopted this sort of rhetoric, 2023. And then just a few weeks ago, Mike Nag, again, touring the state, Iowa, setting records for conservation implementation, and is building momentum behind our statewide water quality efforts. So all this momentum, right, over years and years and years, when do we see the effects in our water? As we as citizens, when can we expect to see things improve, right? And so I hear all the time, people say this, oh, come to my farm and see what I'm doing. Come to my farm so I can show you. Well, yes, there are exemplary farmers in Iowa. There's no doubt about it. They're doing everything that's available to reduce the pollution from their farm. But everybody wants me to believe that they're representative of the larger body of farmers. And so we see the media trot out, the same people time after time after time to try to paint the picture that this person is representative of the larger body of farmers. No, I'm not going to any more farms. It's not my job to give absolution, right, to some farmers that are doing conservation. That should be the expectation, right? That should be the expectation. That person should not be the exception. We need adoption. We need en masse. We need farmers to adopt en masse the stuff that the extraordinary farmers are doing. And so I'll finish with my slides on this quote here. C.S. Lewis, famous writer from Britain, and wrote lots and lots of books. And this quote here, what we call man's power over nature turns out to be a power exercised by some men over other men with nature as its instrument. And I think that's exactly what we have here in Iowa. The situation we have here, it isn't because of a technological failure. It isn't because of, we haven't been able to engage farmers. It isn't because we haven't been able to educate. It's an issue of power, okay? It's an issue of power. Big agriculture has it, you don't, right? And because you don't, you are expected to endure the consequences of the pollution that results from the existing production system. There's only one way this changes, and that's if you as citizens are empowered and organize and agitate. And so that's why we're here. We want to try to empower you and give you the information that you need to communicate with your elected leaders and your community leaders and leaders in agriculture. You need information to be empowered, okay? And so we want you to have the information you need that you can use to agitate for better water. And so, do we want to do questions?
Yes, I've got a microphone, I'll take it to people.
So, everywhere I go, people seem to want to just ask me questions, and so I want to give you time to ask any questions if you have.
I can bring a microphone if anyone has a question or a comment.
You mentioned the exemplary farmers, and I know there are many of them here in this state and in other states. Recently, I started working with the Dubuque County Soil and Water Conservation District as urban stormwater coordinator. A number of things come up in that, but previously was working in Grant County, Wisconsin as a soil and water conservation technician. One thing that the state of Wisconsin has taken on as its mission is to provide a tool to empower those producers to understand those nutrient applications. And it's something in conversations across the state and people who've been in this a little bit longer here in this particular neck of the woods it's just not available. You know, for those producers who wanted to have a resource, a tool that helped them plan those nutrient applications. Say they have the pit of manure or whatever other chemicals that they need to apply to get to that harvest that they're planning, it's just not available. And I tell you, in speaking with some producers, it's something that they want.
So Iowa State does have their N rate calculator, and so you can go to that and you can put in the price of corn and you can put in the price of nitrogen, and it'll give you a recommended rate of application. For corn after soybeans in Iowa, that's about, right now, it's about 140, 145 pounds per acre, I think. And we know statewide, when we look at statewide averages for commercial fertilizer application, we're way above that just with the commercial, and that's before we ever add in the manure. And so about 60% of our inputs here in Iowa are from commercial fertilizer, about 40% from manure. And so for manure, it's important to recognize that when we passed our laws in the early 2000s, the rules around the manure management plans, as Steve Vasey talked about, were based on what we call the yield goal formula, okay? And so if a farmer thinks he can get 200 bushel of corn off a field, to determine how much manure nitrogen he should put on that field, should multiply it by 1.2. 1.2 times 200 is 240. Well, that formula has been discredited, and it's been discredited for a long, long time. And we know it's not protective of the environment, and we know it's not agronomically consistent with what we know about crop uptake. But that is the law. And so our law here in Iowa endorses an over-application of manure nutrients to our crops. We need a new law. Yes, we need more guidance from the land-grant university, but I can tell you, having worked in academia, people in that sector are terrified of telling farmers that they're doing something wrong. They're terrified of telling farmers that they're applying too much. And so we have this culture here in Iowa of fertilization that we're really married to this yield goal thing when it comes to manure, and we really think we need, 200, 250 pounds of nitrogen per acre. I mean, that's just the culture here.
I'm just concerned about the lack of concern with the DNR when you contact them. I've seen things that would make you sick. I viewed a sinkhole with water running down in it. It was full of dead livestock. I approached the farmer and he said, my well water's fine.
Yeah.
I saw another sinkhole that was full of empty chemical containers. I saw one field that was spread with liquid manure that ran down the hill and filled up the retention basin within about 4 inches of the top of the standpipe. I canoed by another place where the guy's hog building was in a low ravine. The lagoon was full and the manure was running out into the Maquoketa River. It looked like black grease. I've been down in Coldwater Cave where you go down 100 and some foot shaft. Go down there in the spring, it's a wet cave, you're in water all the time. It smells like manure when you go up in Coldwater Cave in the spring. And I talked with the DNR people about these issues, and the guy I talked to said, when I do the water analysis and the photographic documentation and take it to my boss in the DNR, he looks at me and says, we're not gonna do this in an agricultural state now, are we? Yeah. And he said the conversation's done. And when the Farm Bureau is one of the biggest lobbying groups in the state, you won't see anything done. There was a speaker here some years back. He was a investigative reporter for a small paper in northern Iowa, and the water department in Des Moines that draws its water from the Raccoon River sued the county to the north for pollution in the river, and this guy found that Monsanto had given the board of supervisors in that county over $1 million to fight the suit.
Yeah.
So, do you think anything's gonna be done?
So I sat next to him yesterday.
Not to make,
That's Art Coleman. That's a guy that I did the program with yesterday. And actually, it was his son that found that out, then Art wrote it up. So, as far as DNR, I don't think it's no secret that DNR is what we call captured, right? And so this is, in the biz, it's what we call industry capture. Industry has captured the agency responsible for regulating it. And so this is a problem all over our country, but it's particularly keen here with DNR. And so, I've worked with lots of DNR people over the years, and, there's always there's a culture out there, we shouldn't criticize them because as individuals, they're good people, right? And they want what's best, but collectively, it's dysfunctional. And I want to tell you, having observed this over the last 25 years, the existing DNR has been built brick by brick by brick, very methodically, to get what we have today. And so we see, we mentioned the county supervisors. The county supervisors, pass the buck to DNR. Our hands are tied, we can't do anything. It's DNR's responsibility. Well, that's really convenient, right? When DNR has been built brick by brick to make every ruling in favor of agriculture, it's really convenient for the counties to say this. Well, our hands are tied. Look, as Steve said, these supervisors have standing. We need to demand from these supervisors that they hold DNR accountable. And so as us as individuals, very few of us are going to be able to do this, but there are people in our state, leaders in our state, that can do a much better job of doing that. And just to finish this answer, Sierra Club has petitioned EPA to take primacy on enforcement on the Clean Water Act away from DNR, okay? And so that would be quite a major step. As Jim said, EPA contracts with DNR to do the enforcement. DNR, or EPA in effect, would say, okay, we're done contracting with DNR, we're gonna take it. And so there is a petition right now being considered to do that.
another thing, I might be wrong, but is government subsidy payments based on yield?
So they are, and so that's the new crop insurance program, the ARC PLC, and so farmers have a choice to ensure their revenue or their yields, and so yes, that's.
So you're rewarded for over applying to boost your yield.
So that's right. Every country that subsidizes crop production has these same sorts of problems with nutrient pollution. In that the farmer is incentivized to over apply. That's right. The current system incentivizes that.
Being a
Yes.
saltwater district commissioner, I got a question for you. When you talk about water quality, when you talk about air quality, don't you think a lot of this starts with soil?
So that we have a lot of discussion now of soil health. And I would say that soil health is very intuitive, right? And so Jim talks about industrial agriculture. Well, what is industrial agriculture? What is it? And for me, it's when we divorced agriculture from nature and married it to the petrochemical industry. And so when we did that, we reduced the number of people that we needed on the landscape, right? We reduce the number of people. Well, if you're going to marry up your agricultural system with nature such that your soil health is improving, it takes more work, right? It takes more work. And so we need farmers willing to put in the time to do the things to enhance the condition of our soils here in Iowa such that our production systems are married up again with nature. Now, we want farmers to do these things that improve soil health, there's lots of ways to define that, but mainly it's increasing the amount of organic matter in the soil. And so the big question is, should we pay them to do that, right? And so I think there's arguments for doing that. I think the idea that this is a climate change solution is not right. I don't think that it is much of a climate change solution, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And so we do need to return biology, the lost biology to our soils. That will help sequester nutrients, it'll help sequester water, and over the long haul, it will improve the condition of the environment.
Time for one more question?
I think the soil health is somewhat of an answer to climate change because of the carbon cycle. If you're increasing the organic matter in the soil, you're pulling a lot of carbon out of the air. The plant pulls a lot of carbon, and basically when you're doing that, you're storing that carbon in the soil. I know some of it's being lost back to the environment. Yes, I agree with you there. But if we can store that, and some of the soil scientists are saying that basically if you increase 1% organic matter in the soil, you're pulling about 75 to 100 pounds of carbon out of the air. And that's a major factor there. If you do that every acre in Iowa, how much would that pull out of the air?
So this is the issue I have with the soil health thing as a climate change solution. Look at what agriculture's #1 budget item is for greenhouse gas emissions. It's not CO2. CO2 is way down at the bottom. What's huge is nitrous oxide emissions. Nitrous oxide makes up about half of all the greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. Nitrous oxide is 300 times more powerful than CO2 as a greenhouse gas emission, as a greenhouse gas. Well, how do we reduce nitrous oxide emissions? We reduce the amount of fertilizer that we're applying. That's one thing. But also we apply it in different ways, in different times, and all these other things. And nobody wants to talk about that. And so I'm really sort of morally opposed to talking about this soil health as a climate change solution until we're willing to face the music on this nitrous oxide emissions, and that means addressing fertilizer application.
Why are corn stalks baled? You see big round bales of corn
So
stalks.
silage or hay, silage mainly, yeah.
Pardon?
Most of that is basically when they're out there baling the corn stalks in the fall. You see, they don't raise oats anymore for bedding. They need the bedding source, and that's mainly what the corn stalks are used for.
So
Some of it's fed for roughage and irrigation, very little, but most of it's for bedding and for the animals in the winter.
So we did have an effort here for a while to try to make ethanol out of corn stover, and it has kind of flopped. And so, at least around Ames, you'd see these huge rectangular bales, and that oftentimes was going to the cellulosic plant in Nevada.
Well, Chris Jones, thank you so very much for your presentation. Why don't you bring the meeting to a close with a tale. The issue to me as a civil right is one that is personal to me. And I'll tell you the background briefly and tell you my hope is that all of us together, individually, can find our ways to demonstrate the courage to stand up. It's not easy. Ask the politician who stood up and spoke truth. Ask the displaced University of Iowa employees who stood up and told the truth and the kinds of pressures that they faced. It's not easy. My view of it, what I call it to myself, I don't know that it has sale value beyond this. I call it Jim Crow environmentalism. And what I mean by that is that we're facing a structure built up over decades, which enhances greatly the power of a small number of people and disenfranchises others. When we come metaphorically up to big agriculture, we're sort of expected to look down and get out of the way and have them move by. This being my predisposition, a story that I will tell you now has special meaning to me. I hope it is something I can share with you in some effect. One state that I spend more time on than any other except living here in Iowa is Alabama. I happen to have been for the last 8 years and will continue for some period of time, I hope, representing a black man on death row in Alabama. And in order to do that representation requires multiple trips, doing investigations and all the rest. Both before I go down and after I've met with my client and others, I try to carve out time just to sit in spots that are sacred to me, maybe to you. It was the time when I was of an age when these images coming up in black and white TV for the first time described the march from Selma to Montgomery, or police dogs chasing young black folks in Birmingham. And when I go to Montgomery and sit in Dexter Avenue Baptist Church where Martin Luther King was a preacher, when so happened Rosa Parks got on a bus. He hadn't been there very long, wasn't planning to be a civil rights leader. He wanted to be a preacher in a small church so he could find a job, a nice quiet job at a black university campus. That's what his father, Papa King, had in mind for him. But Rosa Parks sat on the bus and was moved back, and you had a social movement coming up. The social movement, things don't just happen. You take the years before that in the 1950s, and there were seethings, energies expressed in libraries and in church basements, views that something should be different. And I think a lot of it had to do with black servicemen coming back from World War II and the Korean War and having experienced a social structure that gauged them on bravery and merit and effort and not the blackness of their skin. And they came back and confronted Jim Crow again in Mississippi and Alabama. And there was this view the world could be different, not necessarily knowledge how to do it. And so that was the energy. And Martin Luther King happened to come into Montgomery, and they needed a leader because the internal leaders there were fighting with each other. They all knew each other, so they were fighting with each other. Martin Luther King was new on the block, and he was appointed leader. That from 1955 until 1959, November 11 of that year, is where it gets personal to me. See, he came to the University of Iowa to give a speech at the University of Iowa campus at the invitation of my father-in-law, who was a theologian. And he and Dr. King knew each other from that meeting, and he was given a book called The Measure of a Man, a small group of sermons. And in that sermon, what he told was the Good Samaritan story. The road to Jericho, you may recall it. The road to Jericho is the myth that was told. Why it rang in my own heart was that was the sermon in the book given to my father-in-law, inscribed to him before he left on a Greyhound bus to go to the next town. And in it, it describes, you know the story, those who had status in the community at that time were too busy. They walked by, and it was a person with little status who stopped and provided aid to the fallen party. And everyone knew that the road to Jericho was a dangerous road. There were reasons not to lend help. Sometimes people were robbed just by stopping to give help because it was an imposter. We're not on the road to Jericho here, but we're on the environmental road to where? I don't know. Not to Bloody Run, but to someplace. And it's my hope that as we as Iowans think, it wasn't that long ago that we were the best educated state in America. It wasn't that long ago that settlers came here and found the most pure water that they'd ever seen in their lives. It wasn't that long ago that Iowans were considered healthy. What has happened? We have to ask ourselves and get invested in some way, I think. Now our education rate dips, our health, can you believe it, the highest cancer rate growing in the nation. What has happened here? Well, I think we confront structures of power and influence, and we feel degraded, we feel powerless. Whether through this group or through some other group, it is my hope that you will stop and lend a hand. We have this curious, wonderful but curious new tradition in Iowa. We stop University of Iowa at football games at the first quarter and wave to the cancer patients, the children who are up above. That's a great tradition, but why do they have the cancers? We should at least be asking the question. And when the data came out this spring that I just described, that Iowa has the only growing cancer rate in America and the second highest rate, the experts, and I would say, I don't know these people, but I gather they do their jobs with some fear. They know what happened to Chris. And when they're asked, well, what's going on, they said, well, we think it's binge drinking by older Iowans. That was the answer that they gave. Well, phooey. We hope it's a new era for activism, clean water. We hope you'll be a part of it. We hope we've earned the privilege of your membership, but whether or not you join us, we hope you'll do something. And we thank you today for coming.